Hello, everybody. Welcome to Preservation Mirage Preservation Sessions. My name is Melissa Riche. I'm a founder and board member of Preservation Mirage. And we started doing these preservation sessions some time ago, back in October, in fact, as a way of educating the community and keeping our members engaged and basically fulfilling our mission as a non-profit organization. We've had this is the fifth of the preservation sessions, and we hope to keep these going throughout the year. Hopefully also as the pandemic subsides, fingers crossed, we'll be able to meet in person again fairly soon. So today I'm going to be talking you through the history of Rancho Mirage, not talking about country clubs this time, but talking about Rancho Mirage, which started in basically actually in the 1920s, but really grew from the 1930s as a subdivision. Eventually, Rancho Mirage was incorporated in the early 70s, but it started out as just a set of small streets to the west of Highway 111, or to the south, I should say. And I'm going to talk you through exactly how that took place, and we'll take it from there. One thing I will say is that this is a re-recording of a session that we actually held yesterday, April 19th. We apparently had a hacker, and so unfortunately if you missed that session live, you won't be seeing the Q&A session at the end of it. So I hope you enjoy this anyway, and if you do have any questions, do feel free to contact me or any member of the board. Info@preservationmirage.org, and go to our website. So here we are, early timeline for Rancho Mirage. First of all, there was the Butterfield stage, then there was the railroad, and in the 1920s, two men, McIntyre and Davy, purchased land to plant date palms along the Rio del Sol, which is now Bob Hope Drive. In the 1920s, William Everett bought some acreage around 11 Mile Ranch, which is now where the river is today, and he sold the land to developers who wanted to recreate the Nile Valley, complete with camels, and the camels were used as a means of inducement to get people to come and visit this new subdivision. So instead of flying in or driving in, you'd ride in on a camel. And the first street that was created was called Sahara Road, and that's why Sahara Road is called that. And other roads like the Veldt and Tangier and Tunis have similarly desert-like names from North Africa. That project obviously came to an end when the Wall Street crash happened in 1929. And of course, because it took quite a few years for anything to recover from the Great Depression, it was 1934 when a real estate man called Lawrence McComber bought that original subdivision. He, according to an article I read in from 1960, he was the one responsible for calling it Rancho Mirage, but we'll come to that in a minute. He hired someone called Don Cameron, a Canadian expat, as his sales manager. In 1940, Macomber died quite suddenly at the age of 53. And then, of course, the Second World War happened. So again, the whole subdivision just kind of sat there with not much activity. And in 1944, that's when things really changed. So just as the war was coming to an end, Ronald Button bought the subdivision plus several hundred acres, and we're going to be talking about him quite a lot in this talk. So why is Rancho Mirage so called? I get asked this question quite a lot throughout the year. So this one article I found said that Lawrence McComber named the subdivision Rancho Mirage. If it was named after anything, there's also a story that there was an old kind of desert land ranch that existed called El Rancho Mirage, so that's where he would have got the name from. Another story I've heard recently from local historian Tracy Conrad, she believes or has read that Mac Blankenhorn, who was a wealthy Pasadena investor who had bought Smoke Tree Ranch and sold Catalina to the Wrigley family, also invested in a new subdivision that his wife named Rancho Mirage. Like anything in life, you need to give things names. So we're not 100% sure. If I ever see something in writing on a deed with somebody's name on it, then I'll know for sure, I guess. So here we are in the 1930s, where our story really kicks off. And this is a map of Rancho Mirage subdivision in 1936. And what you can see going through the middle of the screen from the bottom left-hand corner up to the top right is what's now Highway 111, the Palm Springs to Indio Highway. And to the south, it looks on this map as though it's north, but it's actually physically the south of the highway is Sahara Road, running parallel. And you'll see kind of top right the veldt that leads up to Sahara Road. And then you'll also see a lot map for lots that were being created on the other side of the highway as well. The Lawrence McComber hired his first agents, sales agents were Chapman and Cole, and they took on the task in 1936 of selling land in the subdivision. Essentially, they were selling lots. They didn't have plans to build themselves. McComber didn't. Certainly at that time he didn't, and so Chapman and Cole were selling a distinctive desert development for discriminating people 15 minutes from Palm Springs. They sold a few lots. It wasn't a big business back then. Palm Springs was growing pretty fast back then too. But the description for Rancho Mirage says this fine tract was subdivided in a unique manner for those who desire large estates on the baby rancho type. All lots are over half acre in size, and purchasers of lots consisting of over an acre or more will have the privilege of keeping their horses on the property. The proper type of buildings is controlled by architectural restrictions. It went on to describe how famous Magnesia Canyon, which was the canyon immediately above this subdivision, now known as Magnesia Falls Cove, has been dedicated to the association free and clear of all encumbrances and will be the playground for the exclusive use of property owners and their guests. And it says several sales have recently been made. 2 new homes have just been completed. Construction is underway on another, and so on. And in 1937, it says 6 homes are now finished and 2 more are being started. So that was kind of the limit of the activity for a couple of years. Don Cameron, who took over really from Chapman and Cole as the salesperson for the subdivision, was contacted by the ex-wife of Matt Blankenhorn in the 1950s. Don Cameron had been around in the Palm Springs area since the 30s, so he sort of knew the story, but Mrs. Wheeler, she then was, described to Don Cameron the order in which the different buildings had gone up in the subdivision. And I've blown this up on the screen. It says the first building, now Ron Button's tract office, which I think is opposite where the Bank of America is now. There's a very little old Adobe-style building there. That went up in the fall of 1935. Don Cameron's house was also built around the same time, but his actually burned down and he ended up building another house. Then a chap called Phineas Prouty, fantastic name, and he built a house, and Matt Blankenhorn built a house in 1936. And then Frank Morgan, famously the Wizard of Oz, built his adobe house That was the sixth house. And Dave Culver, who became one of the partners in the subdivision, he had the seventh house next door to Frank Morgan's. And so the show got on the road, it says. This is believed to be possibly the Mac Blankenhorn house. I can't 100% confirm it. This house is on the city's list of historic resources, although it's not actually designated. There are some fairly new owners, and I'm hopeful that they'll decide to have the house designated, because there are so few of these 30s houses. There are probably 3 or 4 left total in this subdivision. Obviously, at one time there were probably a dozen or more, and this is one of the rare ones, and it's quite different, quite unusual, and I think really attractive. So one of these days we'll find out if this was Mac Blankenhorn's. He was from Pasadena originally, and that was the case with quite a few of the people who were investing in Rancho Mirage at the time. So this is a house that was built in 1937 by Van Pelt and Lind, and John Porter Clark and Albert Frey were in the Palm Springs office for Van Pelt and Lind. I think Van Pelt and Lind enabled them to practice as architects by associating with them. And this house was originally designated as a historic resource. And it was very original, really, as you can see on the outside, up until a few years ago, just as we, Preservation Mirage, were getting started, work got underway on this house. And unfortunately, back in 2011, the then owner of this house had actually rescinded their designation, which you are allowed to do. Property owners' rights trump preservation rights, as we're often reminded. And so with no historic designation, even though it was on the list of historic resources, the then owner or subsequent owner started pulling the house apart. Now, originally, we were fairly hopeful that it was going to just be a sort of restoration, because we could see that parts of it were being kept, but very minimal parts of it. And so, because we were only just forming then as a non-profit, we weren't able to put anything into action with preserving this property. And this is what it looks like today. You can actually see on the left of that enormous, great big portico in the center, the original sort of shed roof that I showed you in the previous photograph. But other than that, not much that's original. So this is what happens. However, good news, the Frank Morgan house on Sahara Road, just a few doors down from that other one, this house was completed in 1939, designed by Philip Ormsby and Lloyd Steffgen, who I think was also a Pasadena architect. And the exterior of this house is still really original. It's adobe style, as you can see, and it has beautiful sort of rock footings to it, and lovely beams over the casement windows too. So in the 1940s, things were still kind of quiet. So here you can see Frank Morgan, the Wizard of Oz, on the right with his brother on the left, or vice versa. I can't actually tell. They look so similar and not identified particularly in this picture. And Frank Morgan was spending a lot of time at his desert house, and he often had famous guests, in this case, a famous film director called Ernest Lubitsch, who had recently directed the picture Ninotchka, which had just held its premiere at the Palm Springs Theatre, starring Greta Garbo and Melvyn Douglas. And he went to stay indefinitely, it says. I'm not quite sure what that means, with Frank Morgan at his house. The 1940s, I mentioned before, Mr. McComber, who was the head of the Rancho Mirage subdivision, passed away quite suddenly at the age of 53. And Don Cameron was the track manager, so he carried on selling sites. There's a quirky little headline here about a New York advertising man who's turns up one night with a flashlight, chooses a lot, and then starts building a home the next day. There wasn't a lot going on in the early 40s. The only other development I found is this retired judge who apparently was quite famous, Francis Krull from San Francisco, decided he was going to build 5 adobe brick homes. And one of the inducements to go and visit the site was to witness how adobe brick is made. So you could visit the clay deposit at the subdivision any weekday. Subsequently, I found an article saying that he was having material supply problems, but he must have managed to make something, because then he starts advertising Adobe's well-made, cheap for quick sale at Rancho Mirage. See Francis Krull. And somehow Krull also had a street named after him for a brief time, and I'm not sure where that was. It's no longer on the maps, and I'm not sure if any of the Adobes are still there. So that was it, really, in the first couple of years of the 40s. Then post-war, as I mentioned earlier, things started to change. In 1944, Major A. Ronald Button bought the subdivision plus several hundred acres of cove land. Now, Don Cameron was actually the man that sold this to him. So you can imagine he was pretty excited the day that Ronald Button arrived and said, "I'm buying the whole lot and I'm going to buy all this other land." It's a real estate dream come true, I think. Ronald Button was, he'd spent the war actually at the Hal Roach Studios in Los Angeles, working alongside Ronald Reagan. And he was actually an entertainment attorney, very well connected, married to a film star who you'll see here, Gladys McConnell, who was a silent film star, as you can sort of tell by the photo. And they lived in some wonderful luxury at their beautiful Hollywood Hills home. You can see a vintage photograph of that house at the top. Hasn't changed too much, I'm happy to say, and it's still there. It's up on Outpost Drive in Hollywood Hills. So he was a very successful entertainment lawyer and entrepreneur, and we'll be talking about him a lot. In 1946, another thing happened that was key to the success of the Rancho Mirage subdivision. There had been a sort of informal airstrip, a grass airstrip that was already in use by private airplanes, two-seaters, flying in from Los Angeles, primarily in San Diego. And in 1946, the airstrip became more of a formal establishment. They established an air park, and the two men that did that hired Henry or Hank Gogarty to prepare the field and be in charge of the air park. So the 3,200-foot strip became a much more formal area. And this is what it ended up looking like only a few years later. By the late 40s, Hank Gogarty and his wife had actually found some old World War II barracks buildings that they were able to repurpose into hotel accommodation. And you can see this in this wonderful aerial view vintage postcard. They created a round building that was really the main hotel. You can see that up towards the top where the airplanes are. And that was the Compass Room as well, which became a really popular restaurant, and a swimming pool, a big round swimming pool that actually features on the cover of Peter Maruzzi's book, Palm Springs Weekend. You'll see the plane in front of the hotel. So people could fly in, and people did. I mean, it was a big deal back then, especially two-seater planes, very informal way of getting around quickly from LA in particular. for celebrities, for industrialists, for politicians. They use this airstrip a lot, and obviously, as a way of promoting Rancho Mirage, the subdivision, this airstrip came in really handy, and people who bought there were able to use this and just literally be right across the road. One thing to remember is that, of course, the interstate highways were really in their infancy, and I-10, as we know it today, didn't exist. I mean, even when I was coming out to Palm Springs in the early 70s, it wasn't really going all the way through. So, yes, this was a very convenient way to get in and out. Here we have a picture of Ronald Button with Don Cameron, the famous Don Cameron, and Isabel Cameron, Don Cameron's wife. And guess where they're having lunch? They're having lunch in the compass room of the Desert Air Hotel. And in the background, you can just make out some airplanes parked. Hedy Lamarr, what's she doing here? Well, she is here because she was one of Ronald Button's many entertainment industry clients. And I love this photograph, so any excuse to put it in here. And I don't know about you, but I love a bit of Hollywood gossip. So just to lighten things up here, I'm going to explain that this was probably the late 40s, early 50s. Hedy Lamarr was seeking a divorce from her third husband, John Loder, a British-born film actor. Apparently, Superior Judge Thurman Clarke, who was pretty famous himself, following a brief hearing during which Hedy Lamarr, complained that Loder used to fall asleep in the midst of their conversations. That's almost impossible to believe, given that Hedy Lamarr was super smart and also extremely beautiful. But apparently, Miss Lamarr's attorney, A. Ronald Button, one and the same, asked her, "Is it true that he has been indifferent toward you and the children for the last 2 years?" To which she replied, "Yes, it is." And that was really how that piece of gossip kind of turned into the connection between Lamarr and Button. And this is Hedy Lamarr's Rancho Mirage house because, of course, A. Ronald Button, being the entrepreneurial character that he was and with his great connections, convinced some of his clients to build houses in Rancho Mirage. This is a beautiful 1940s ranch, very much a ranch-style house with some, mid-century characteristics. We have a little bit of clear story windows on the left-hand side. We have that wonderful rock wall, both on the right and on the left, and a hip roof, which is less associated with mid-century, but you do come across them. I know where this house is, but if I told you, I'd have to kill you, so I'm not going to tell you. I'd like to keep the privacy of the lady who lives there now, but some of you may recognize it, in which case you'll now know that this is the Hedy Lamarr house, and you'll see the old-fashioned wood railing fencing going around the front of it as well. I think it's just a classic California ranch house. Also in 1946, Dave Culver and Ronald Button, who had now formed a partnership, were starting to advertise Rancho Mirage, and this was the first advertisement that I found, which shows how conveniently a little plane flying overhead, and it shows a very slightly modernist style of home. We don't know who it's by, as a lot of the houses, we're not sure who the architects were, but this is probably block built or cinder block or pumice block. And at this time, they were still mostly involved in selling lots. That was their main concern. They hadn't quite developed the development proceedings as far as building houses and selling finished homes. I found these early ads in the Palm Springs Villager. On the left-hand side is a plain as plain can be advertisement, which appeared in September 1947. The following month, I guess perhaps because they didn't get much response from the first one, they made the other one the opposite end of the spectrum, and it talks very confusingly about nidification and says that it has something to do with the ancient Greeks. I'm not quite sure why, but apparently nidification was the art of building your nest. So here is a picture in 1948 of Dave Calver and Ronald Button working on their plans for Rancho Mirage. They were studying plans for new additions to the subdivision. So I think this was, I have a map which is too big to make any sense on the small screen, but I have a map of all the lots going all the way up into what's now Magnesia Falls Cove. And I think this is primarily what they're working on here is site plan for all the lots, because they were planning hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homes, as well as selling lots. So it says here that more than 100 homes are occupied or in the process of construction. So they were, by 1948, they were kind of getting on with some home building. And they also had some people building apartment hotel structures, and they'd been approached by the local school district. And so this was now a subdivision that was about to really expand its impact on the whole valley. This is a fun photograph I found of this architect called Barry Frost. I just love the hat. I think it's at least a 10-gallon, well, maybe it's a 5-gallon. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. But Barry Frost set up an office in Rancho Mirage, and he might have even designed that the house that we saw illustrated there. He claimed to be long associated with Clark, John Porter Clark, and Frey, Albert Frey, but no one I've ever spoken to has ever come across his name. So we're not quite sure if that was just wishful thinking on his part or what. He did actually lead a session of architects, quite a big meeting of architects a year or two after this piece appeared. So at some point he had some influence, and we don't know. He didn't stay that long in the desert, I don't believe. So here we are, 1948, ready at last, and it's although it's still talking about residential income lots and other large size lots of one sort or another, it's also talking about homes nearing completion, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, desert-styled homes. It's talking about 8-unit apartment building, and it also is talking about a delightful adobe just completed, so probably not Judge Krull's adobes, probably some other version thereof. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of the 1948 homes that I've been able to find. There are actually more of these than you'd imagine. This is one of them, very simple in style, block built, metal windows if they're still there, some kind of sliding door sometimes to the outside, but just the most simple construction, a very simplified L shape, but sometimes just a straightforward rectangle of a house, maybe 1,100 square feet, but all on huge lots, nearly all of them on half-acre lots, and some, as they indicated earlier, on 1-acre lots. This is another one, very untouched. It has some board and batten siding on the front, very simple. But you can kind of see that this sits on a really big piece of land. So the fact that there are any of these 1940s homes left at all is quite remarkable, because most people who would find this small of a house on this big of a lot wouldn't hesitate to tear down a house and build something much bigger. And of course, that's happened. I'm just revisiting this image because, as I said, I think The style of house most closely matches what I was showing in those 1948 houses. This is, I think, one of the adobe homes that they referred to. It has the, looks like the very original Spanish terracotta tiles on the roof, and it has that very original wood fencing, similar to the fencing that you saw around Hedy Lamar's house. Obviously, we can't really see the house, but again, you get an impression of how big the lots are. And all of these houses actually are along Sahara, mostly along Sahara Road and San Gorgonio Road. Those were the two main roads that were being developed at the time. If you get a chance to drive up either of them, these are towards the western end. The earlier houses are towards the eastern end of Sahara Road. 1948, Ronald Button, who was also the head of the local chapter of AMVETS, which was the American World War II Veterans Organization, he decided that he would have a spring fiesta to promote home sites in Rancho Mirage, and the reward, I guess it was some kind of raffle, was a home site estate in beautiful Rancho Mirage. And the picture you see on the left that I've blown up is on this ad, and I am not familiar with this style of home. So if it was ever built, I don't know. It might have just been that he commissioned an architect to draw something that would give people the impression of what they could have. The house at the top, I have seen versions of that, the hip roof style, and I'll show you one of those in a minute. But kind of fanciful designs, and I'd like to see what they were thinking about in 1948. These are great illustrations of the way house design was going back then. So now we get to the 1950s, and things kind of still have that kind of 40s look to them. So this is another block built house, really in the style of the 1948 houses. Everything is built of these kind of cinder bricks, and the inside of the houses are open beams. The windows are, as you can see in the picture on the bottom right, the windows are metal frames. And this house is fabulously original. I think the floor's probably original too. The fireplace certainly is, and as I say, the windows are. And the way we can tell how original it is, because we found a historic photo of it. This was the John Bush residence. On the left, you can see, I'm just going to move my cursor around. This was a guest house, and it's still a guest house. On the right is the main part of the house, and in the middle is a breezeway that goes between the two buildings. And all of that is still here. And the top right-hand side is a picture of the house the way it looks today. And the left-hand portion is still a guest house. The breezeway actually leads you down to a swimming pool, and then the main part of the house is on the right-hand side. Beautiful vintage grounds, really. An amazing tree that I have to believe was there from 1950, and a huge lot again. It's this house actually for rent on Airbnb, so if you know anyone looking for an original Rancho Mirage experience, this one certainly provides it. And we hope to have this. This was going to be on a tour that we were going to do in Magnesia Falls Cove in February, and hopefully we'll get to do that tour next year. So you'll be seeing a few more houses that we'll have on that tour, and it's a beautiful house, well worth the price of admission. So in 1952, things were starting to move ahead a little bit locally. As you know, Tamarisk Country Club and Thunderbird Country Club were both open by then, Thunderbird in 51, Tamarisk in 1952. So by now, Ronald Button is taking out full page ads in Palm Springs telephone directories. And of course, on the top right-hand side, you see the golfer. So this is the first time, obviously, that he's made the connection to the golf clubs, and it's starts to be something that from now on it's always going to be adjoining Thunderbird or adjacent to Thunderbird. And of course they're not really, but advertising back then didn't have the same regulations. You could kind of get away with a little bit of exaggeration, let's say. So here he's advertising 137 new luxury homes completed and building in this multi-million-dollar paradise. And he's building 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes with picture book kitchens, 2-car garages, and all the modern conveniences, luxury features with air conditioning and gas kitchens and color coordinated units and everything you could wish for. The thing about the early 1950s, especially compared to the late 40s, immediately post-war, is that developers had many, many more options. Not only was there more land becoming available, but crucially and critically, building supplies, which had been very, very difficult to obtain right up until about 1951, they became much more readily available. And so between the development that was going on in Palm Springs and the development that was going on in Rancho Mirage, the place must have been just a madhouse of construction. So in 1952, we're revisiting this hip roof house. I haven't come across that many in Magnesia Falls Cove, and this is one that I do know about. On the left-hand side, we see a vintage photograph. And it's kind of a little bit a flipped version of the illustration. And on the right-hand side, you can see the house pretty much as it looks today, and it is actually pretty original. So one of these days, I'm hoping to be able to go and take a look at it. So this is about 1953. Excuse me. By then, Ronald Button was beginning to realize that he couldn't do all the development himself. So he started reaching out to developers, mostly Los Angeles based. And the developer for this part of Rancho Mirage was a guy called K. Sandy Sinette, who in fact was the president of the California Home Building Council, and very highly respected, building a lot of communities in Los Angeles. And Ronald Button, I think, probably would have met him at various events and asked him to if he'd be interested in building some homes in Rancho Mirage. So he, Sinette, came up with this particular design, and there are quite a lot of these houses still in Magnesia Falls Cove. This is a slightly clearer image of it because it's a positive image. Very simple ranch home. I mean, really not many frills on this, and I don't think you could ever claim it as, leading edge design. However, what it does have is these wonderful triangulated clerestory windows at the top of the garage wall, and also at the top of the living area wall on the left-hand side. Great big picture window here looking out to the street. And then conveniently, this is a house that in fact has gone through some remodeling and restoration, but before it did, I managed to sneak this picture off the internet. And you can see here exactly the same shaped windows and the window in the front. These houses were about 1,200 square feet. They were 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and they were on slightly smaller lots. They had swimming pools in the back for the most part, and they were called Sahara Terrace homes. So I snuck this picture off the internet. This was a house that, in fact, believe it's the same house that I just showed you, now remodeled. But it gives you an idea of the space inside. So you've got this, simple post and beam construction. You've got the block fireplace on the left-hand side, which was exactly as it would have been originally, although it's been painted. I think this window has been added. One of these windows has been added, but you can see the clear story windows at the top there. And if you want to figure out which of the Sahara terrace homes in Magnesia Falls Cove today, all you have to do literally is drive around and look for these triangulated windows at the end of the garage and at the end of the living space, and then you'll know that that's what you're looking at. Some of the homes have had additions put onto them, and 1,200 square feet was fine in the early 50s, but most people want a bit more space these days. But even with additions, they still have a certain character and style, and I think the ones that are original make really fantastic use of the space, and so I think they're always worth looking at. This ad kind of tickles me because this is an ad for Sahara Terrace, but as you can see, the person who chose the image chose a photograph that really shows off the birdcage on the right-hand side more than just about anything. And I think as a way of promoting a house, it was a pretty unconventional thing to do. But you can see the fireplace in the back and the sliding glass doors leading out to the swimming pool in the back as well. So the signage on the right would have been on Highway 111, and that would have been signing people to go up to San Gorgonio Road, where most of these houses were, but they were kind of dotted around the community. By the early 50s, Rancho Mirage had these rather impressive gates. I haven't actually figured out exactly where they are, but there is that was a common way back then for communities to really identify themselves, and so Rancho Mirage had this rather lovely signage on these gorgeous stone walls. So in 1956, though, excuse me, just 1 second. Okay, that's better. Okay, in 1956, Button again looked to somebody else to help him develop this community, and he turned to his brother-in-law, Art Linkletter, to build what became known as Linkletter Homes. And this is an aerial view that was published in the Desert Sun, which shows what the community looked like at the time they were embarking on this new development. In the towards the lower part of the image, you can see Highway 111 running from left to right. Up above, I'm moving my cursor around, hopefully you can see it. You'll see the top of the canyon. Now this space here is now Porcupine Creek, and this is the road that leads up to that area as well. And then this is the Veldt, where there's they had built a swimming pool by the late 40s, to a community pool that would hopefully attract more buyers. And then you've also got Sahara Road, which is this long line going across here from left to right. But you can also see the streets just beginning to take shape up above, and more streets being built here, more lots being identified. So this is where they were going to start building the Linkletter homes, essentially, and they had planned to build 350. Here you've got Ronald Button with Art Linkletter. It says in the caption, they're discussing the architectural beauty of the home above. Unfortunately, you can't see much of the home in this picture. And unfortunately, no one ever mentions, not in advertising, not in articles or anything, who the architects of these Linkletter homes actually were. I've spent a good amount of time over the last few years trying to establish who designed them. I have some ideas, but I haven't been able to confirm anything. So one of these days you'll hear a giant scream, and it'll be me having found out who designed them. They're very beautiful, though. I think these houses of the mid-century homes up there really have the most style of any of them. You can see in the image on the left, this was again from actually the yellow pages of the phone directory, I think the 1956 phone directory, promoting an art link letter development. And the design of the house in the image shows you this kind of triangulated window arrangement where the windows on both sides of the living room kind of come to a point. Um, Obviously, Art Linkletter's name was a big draw. He was very famous at the time. He was a well-known television and radio personality. He had a show called Art Linkletter's House Party. So guess what? He decided to build some houses. I think the houses came first, actually. And then he had another show called People Are Funny about some things, but they really get serious. And you will too when you see this totally new concept of luxurious living. So this was the Art Linkletter connection. And these homes were three bedroom, 2 bath. This was another ad, beautiful luxuriant homes, luxuriant being a word I usually associate with shampoo and hair, but often applied to real estate advertising back then. And here they're talking about model furnished homes. 75 new custom built homes will now be open daily for your inspection. So they were moving right along with the building of these homes. And this is what one of them looks like today. I've identified probably at least a dozen of them that are still standing. A lot of them have been quite severely remodeled, but some of them really have maintained their integrity. There were at least 3 different styles. So this was the style that you saw in the advertising. And then there were a couple of other styles that were created as well. My feeling is that they might possibly have been Charles Dubois because he was doing some similar designs elsewhere in Southern California. They might have been Jack McCallum because he was designing homes in Rancho Mirage as well. And but one of these days we'll find out. But they're great looking. I think you'll agree. Another person who bought one of these was Jeff Chandler. He was a well-known film star at the time, had an amazing head of hair that went prematurely grey. He was a good Jewish boy from back east who always got to play the part of either Native American Indians or Arabs. So, but he was Oscar nominated for a film called Cochise, where he played the leading role, and he bought this house, which is up on, I want to say Tangier Road or Tunis, can't remember. Anyway, it's this is what it looks like today. So as you can see, it hasn't changed dramatically. Really, the exterior is pretty original. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of the link letter designs. This is another version of the design. So instead of the windows coming to a sort of triangulated point in the front, this is a flat wall of windows and a sort of more simple L shape for the house itself. This house was very immaculately restored to its original state by an owner a few years ago. Subsequent owners decided to put their own mark on the interior, but it's still lovely and still a great example. This is an aerial photograph showing what Rancho Mirage, the subdivision, was beginning to look like in 1958, I think. The space in the middle here with the swimming pool, that's the community pool. So that's the Velt. I think this is Highway 111. I think Bank of America is now there, or is it Wally's Desert Turtle? I can't remember, one of those. This empty lot I'm going to refer to in a short while. On the left, we have what was then a very successful hotel called Whispering Waters. And you'll see here some more houses built here. I think these are mostly the Linkletter homes. They're the newest ones. the dates of the houses kind of get newer as you go further up the hill, and that's another way to figure out where you are when you're driving around the neighborhood. I'm not going to talk about hotels really very much during this talk, because I think I can do a whole separate talk about hotels lost and found and otherwise in Rancho Mirage. But I do want to mention Whispering Waters because it's so impactful, a bit like Desert Air Hotel and Air Park was. Whispering Waters had a big impact on the community because it brought in numerous celebrities, in fact, celebrity owners, as you'll see in a minute. This was designed originally by Powers, Daly, and DeRosa, who were famous nationwide, but is famous especially for designing those incredible Googie style bowling alleys that you used to find all over America, and certainly in Southern California up until 20, 30 years ago when they started pulling them down. There are a couple still left, but they were famous Long Beach architects, and if you've ever come across their work, you'd be pretty impressed. They were amazing architects. So this was a hotel that opened in October 1957. And I was fortunate enough to meet the daughter of the person who originally built the hotel, the original owner, who rather overstretched himself, unfortunately. But he fulfilled the dream, apparently, of his to build and own a hotel. And this is the rear view of the hotel, with the swimming pool, obviously. And here's a postcard of it that shows how it's situated, with the interior grounds being extensive and the buildings, the hotel rooms kind of dotted around the perimeter, with a central core of the swimming pool and the main restaurant facilities. So later on, I mean, really soon, not very long after it opened, this was a takeover by a group of television stars. On the left, you'll see Hugh O'Brien, Dennis Weaver, Aaron Spelling, who's playing the role of the concierge in the back, Carolyn Jones, who was Aaron Spelling's wife at the time and known as Morticia Adams, obviously, and Lloyd Bridges, who probably needs no introduction to any of you. And they're dressed, on the left, they're dressed up as their roles at the hotel, which is kind of fun. And this appeared in the TV guide when they just took over the hotel. They owned it for a couple of years. A couple of them sort of decided to split off and do their own thing. I think Dennis Weaver and Hugh O'Brien stayed involved in it for the longest time. And then this is the front of the hotel as it faces Sahara Road. So if you're on Sahara Road, this is kind of in the center of Sahara Road. You'll see this wall of rock, and you'll actually see a sign that says Whispering Waters. The front's been modified, and the rest of the buildings, I haven't shown the way they look today, but they've been comprehensively Santa Fe'd. So you won't be looking for mid-century buildings particularly, but you'll be looking for Santa Fe or Santa Fe, depending on your point of view. I'd love to get a hammer and chisel and just take all the stucco and the false beams off and take it back, but it's probably not going to happen. But boy, the walls in this hotel could really talk, I'm sure. So by 1958, Ronald Button had become treasurer of the state of California. He actually became treasurer of the state of California in 1956 to 59. And the pressures of his job, I think, as well as Art Linkletter's own pressures, meant that that particular relationship came to an end, and maybe even conflict of interest to do with having a job as a treasurer for the state in Sacramento. So Ronald Button, sold all the rest of the lots to Dessa and Garfield. They were Beverly Hills developers. Hal Garfield was known for building a lot of office buildings and that kind of thing in Los Angeles. And so they took over the whole of Rancho Mirage. They kind of rebranded it with their own designs, and they talked about it as being obviously close to the country clubs, America's most distinctive desert community, and talked about all the different facilities that they were providing and what was nearby. So also in 1958, they announced that they were doing groundbreaking for 1,000 more homes, that they were really going to move up the cove and build out most of the rest of the lots. That was the plan. One of the best things about this particular article is it finally names a couple of the architects, and it names them as Jack McCallum and Robert Pitchford. Jack McCallum, I mentioned earlier, he lived in Rancho Mirage, a subdivision, had been living there since the early 50s. And Robert Pitchford also lived in Rancho Mirage, and they both carried on. They stayed in the desert for a long time. They parted ways. Pitchford went to work with Harold Bissner for a few years. And McCallum partnered eventually with John Walling from the late 70s, and it was McCallum and Walling, I think it was. Unfortunately, don't have any archives on McCallum. We are trying to access some of the Pitchford archives. The Palm Desert Historical Society has accessed some of those, and one of these days we hope we'll finally identify the designs and so on of some of the other houses in Magnesia Falls Cove. But at least we know that from 1958 probably to about 1961, most of the homes were designed by this pair of architects. So the other, there were various contractors involved, like Trenton Dunphy, who lived in Rancho Mirage and built his own home there. And there were other developers moving in as well, but these are the big plans for 1958. This one assumes, because it came from a Dessa and Garfield ad, is a house designed by McCallum and Pitchford. And here you can see one today. The right-hand side carport has been filled in, as they often are, and used for living space. But you can see that lower gable on the left-hand side and just get a peek of the higher gable behind it. And here's another version, kind of flipped, where you have the lower gable on the right and the higher gable in the center. Again, the garage carport has been filled in. This is the full page ad for Dessa and Garfield, and they've got that same illustration at the top top of the ad. I always think it's interesting to really read these ads in detail, because sometimes you find the name of the architect, not in this case, unfortunately, well, or in the case of any of the others. But we do get here a story about how ready for immediate occupancy are 5 luxurious custom detailed homes. And you could choose from ranch style, Chinese modern, or contemporary. And I come across Chinese modern as a reference to house styles more often than you could imagine. So I think in Modernism Week to come, we'll have to look out for some Chinese modern homes and start describing them that way, because there was more Chinese modern going around than I had ever imagined. So these houses came with swimming pools and air conditioning, landscaping, and so on. And home sites were also available. Okay, the 1960s. Something to digest here. a fantastic fact, by 1962, close to 50% of all housing units in the United States had been built since World War II. That is 10 years, just 15 at most, really, that 50% of all housing units in the United States have been built. I find that quite mind-blowing, but when you drive around Southern California, you completely understand it. With the freeways being built, new communities were going up left and right, and so living in a central core didn't become wasn't necessarily what you had to do. So it was the birth of the suburbs, and that applied to Palm Springs and Rancho Mirage too. In 1960, James Roosevelt, who was FDR's son, also bought a house. It's still there today. It's actually pretty original. I think it was possibly McCallum and Pitchford that designed it. They obviously designed custom homes as well, so not everything was built to a particular design. So in the case of James Roosevelt, I'm not sure if he had something specifically designed for him. The building permit kind of indicates to me that he did. And then, just as an aside, the woman in the middle, who was his wife, obviously, when I was researching James Roosevelt, I discovered that they were living in Switzerland for a while, and she stabbed him in the back one day. He survived and clearly divorced her, as you would. She ended up living in the house and sad to say, dying in the house some years later. So, bit of a sad story. There were some other developers besides other people building houses. So besides Desser and Garfield having bought all these lots, I think they did something a bit like Ronald Button, where they sold off lots to other developers and said, here, you take a chunk and build out some houses. So the need was expanding exponentially as Palm Springs was bursting at seams and growing in popularity, and Rancho Mirage was doing the same because of the success of the country clubs. They couldn't build fast enough. So Harold Hirsch, who was another Los Angeles developer, moved in and built, I think, at least 30 of these homes. Not many of them left. I found about half a dozen of them. And a fellow historian thinks that these might have been by Charles Dubois. Again, we don't know for sure, but they have a kind of butterfly roof with the garage on the left, like a Kreisel, the clear story windows on the right, and the wall of rock in the center. And those are quite defining features, and you'll see that on this house as well. Flipped, obviously. Dunphy and Fincher built a lot of the houses up in Rancho Mirage at this time for Desser and Garfield. They employed various builders, but Dunphy and Fincher were amongst the most prolific. This house belongs to a woman who I was talking to yesterday, who actually met Dunphy's son or family not very long ago, and remembered this house and was sort of quite teary-eyed driving around the neighborhood looking at places that his father had built. This one is very unusual. There's no other house like this up there, but I think it's rather spectacular with the rock on the left and right, and the breeze block entryway, which kind of masks a separate entrance behind it, is a very spectacular and eye-catching look. This is a house just a couple of doors away. Both these houses were due to be on the tour in February, and I'm hopeful we'll get them on the tour again at some time in the future. You'll see more of the rock detail here. Again, quite large lots too. So in 1964, new developers moved in, connected to Desser and Garfield. Hal Garfield by this time had really made his mark on the community, and in more ways than one, because Hal Gar Road is actually a derivation of Harold Garfield, known as Hal Garfield. So Hal Gar Road is the name of one of the streets in this community, and Gardes Road is a derivation of Dessa and Garfield. So if you're ever driving around, or you know somebody that lives up there and they wonder why this street has such a strange name, it's because of the developers. And that happened actually quite a lot with these new developments. They had to, as I said at the beginning, everything needs a name. So where the name comes from, sometimes it's obvious and sometimes less so, but quite often it comes from the people who are actually developing the communities at the time. So in 1964, Dessa has dropped out of the picture with Garfield, but Garfield has hired his son-in-law, Basil Collier, and Basil Collier had married Suzanne Garfield, Hal Garfield's daughter. So nice job for the son-in-law. Basil Collier moves in with the Garfields and starts building houses up in Rancho Mirage. These houses are along Biskra Road, and they also built houses along Gardes and Halgar. In 1960, later on in 1964, Basil Collier started to partner with William Curran, who was already building houses up there. William Curran was specifically crazy about horses and horse racing, and Basil Collier wasn't immune to the charms of a horse either. And they redeveloped Rancho Manana stables, which are down by Clancy Lane and still there today. And so here's a wonderful picture of them with their friend, the horse. They developed houses and gave the name of the community Regent's Row, or the name of their sort of housing development, Regent's Row. 3 large bedrooms, 1,700 square feet, open beam ceilings, fireplaces, 2 bathrooms, view windows, and old-fashioned pantry. I'm not quite sure what they mean by old-fashioned pantry, because I don't know why it was old-fashioned, but that kind of caught my eye the other day. So this was Regent's Row, and here you have William Curran and Basil Collier promoting the community. This is Halgar Road House, and what I discovered going through these old building permits that we found about 1.5 years ago is that, fortunately for me, I can identify the different houses by the numbers, the style numbers that Curran and Collier gave to each house. So on the building permits, which relate directly to an address on Halgar or Gardes or wherever it might be, it will say something like 2A or 1C or 3B or whatever. And so thanks to Google as well, I can kind of travel down a street, pick out the address, pick out the style number, and define exactly which style is which as I go around Magnesia Falls Cove. I know it sounds obsessive, but honestly, it's actually, for people who are into it, it's really interesting. We're thinking of doing a treasure hunt along these lines. So here we have, for example, style 2A, built in 1965 by Curran and Collier on Halgar Road, and you'll see 3 vertical windows, floor-to-ceiling windows on the right-hand side, separated by the fire chimney stack. And to the left of those windows, a floor-to-ceiling front door effect. I mean, the doors obviously didn't go all the way up the top, but they were styled with panels to look as if they went all the way up. And then this one is not dissimilar in as much as it has those 3 vertical windows on the right, the chimney stack separating them, and then the tall front doors on the left, but instead of the kind of squared off eaves and squared off porch, you have this what I think of as a chrysal sun flap running along the front of it. This house is not in great shape, or at least it wasn't when I pulled this off Google. Maybe it's been redone since then, but some of the houses up there could use some help. But I like to see it when people restore them at least tastefully, and this is a good example. This is style 3B. I think the windows have been changed to some extent, but you can see this recessed porch with a kind of square detail around the windows on the left, as well as the front door itself, and of course the very tall front doors. Style 3A, there's lots of these around, long gable style with the very tall doors, bigger windows but not vertical, more square. And one reason I'm including this photograph here from 1966 is that, as I mentioned, Curran and Collier also owned Rancho Mañana stables, and in this particular article they're talking about how anyone who buys a home at Regent's Row could make use of Rancho Mañana stables, so it was an inducement to buy. In 1966, they they built really fast, and they built a lot of homes, but they sold off some lots to this company, Holiday Realty, who were obviously in a hurry to sell everything before interest rates went up. I couldn't finish this talk without talking about Chalet Palms. This was another development by Basil Collier, this time with his father-in-law, Hal Garfield. It was designed in 1964. It was one of the first condominium communities in Rancho Mirage. The condominium laws came into being in California in 1964. So things, family residences could be built that didn't have to be cooperatives. They could be condominiums. You had that you could get insurance on your property, and it was sort of more detailed law than that, but the FHA changed the distinction so that people could own condominiums. And this was a fantastic opportunity that Collier and Garfield took advantage of, and they developed this community of 30, 900 square foot condominium homes. 900 square feet doesn't sound like a lot, but fortunately, Basil Collier was sensible enough to hire Barry Burkus, and Barry Burkus, who had done Merito Manor and Park Imperial South in Palm Springs, also with his folded plate roofs going sort of zigzagging along, had a fantastic young architect at this time, very young architect. And he was a brilliant space planner, and he created 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom homes at Chalet Palms that really feel a lot bigger when you're inside them. And the other great thing about these homes was the landscaping. Unfortunately, Basil Collier, who's still with us, I'm happy to say, couldn't remember who he hired to do the landscaping. But this community goes up 3 terraces, and you just feel so kind of chilled when you walk in. The swimming pool that you can see in the middle of this illustration is still exactly the same today, and the landscaping obviously has grown in. So I'm re-showing this photograph here because on the right-hand side, this is the empty lot from the late 1950s that I showed you earlier. This is where Chalet Palms was built. Fortunately, we've come across numerous vintage photographs, as well as this wonderful original vintage brochure, which Basil Collier sent to us. And that shows you these gorgeous semicircular staircases rising up into the community, and the lovely rock wall announcing the name of the community, and the lush landscaping, which included olive trees and palm trees and and just everything that made the place special. This is the way it looks today. I'm happy to say that the residents there now really have embraced the history of their community since we discovered Basil Collier. Is still with us, very much alive and well, and since he identified Barry Burkus as the architect. One thing to note here, besides these chalet-style roofs that cover patios and breezeways, is the diamond-shaped shadow block on the left-hand side, and that follows around the perimeter. As with many of these communities, the homes really face inwards. You don't have much of a sense of what everything looks like as you drive around the outside. But if you ever do get a chance to visit the inside of Chalet Palms, please do. It has been open during Modernism Week, and this was in February of last year when we were graced with Basil Collier's presence by the pool at Chalet Palms. Basil is now in his 90s. He arrived with all his family and grandkids. He's shown here really having a whale of a time. Mia from Chalet Palms is on the right with a fabulous hat. And we had a lovely day talking to residents and visitors alike during Modernism Week, and Basil was absolutely ecstatic at how charmed and delightful everybody was and how enthusiastic they were about the community. And it's always a treat for people like me who do the research and manage to track down people who still remember things about places that they built or places they designed or places they lived in. It's like buried treasure when you suddenly come across somebody like Basil, and he really is a treasure too. So that's the end of my presentation today. Normally we would have a Q&A. As I mentioned, we got, I think I mentioned, we got hacked during the live presentation, and unfortunately we weren't able to record it. But if you do have any questions about any of this, don't hesitate to email info@preservationmirage.org, and also visit our website, preservationmirage.org, and stay tuned to us on Facebook, where we make announcements about new events, and hopefully we'll be able to meet in person maybe later this year, who knows. But check back in with us, tell your friends to join. They can join on the website, it's free, and we'd love to see more of you. We've got more than 300 members now, and we're just going from strength to strength, and we'd love to see more of you either online or in person, hopefully soon. Thank you so much, and I'll say goodbye for now. Bye-bye.